let's start the prayers. Got a lot of really good questions. Just a sec. All right, never mind. Okay. So let's do it. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until I reach enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By accumulating merit and wisdom through generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. I pay homage to the sublime mother of the victorious ones of the three times, the inexpressible, inconceivable, and indescribable perfection of wisdom, which is unborn, unceasing, and of the nature of space, and which is the object of realization of the self-knowing primordial wisdom. And then let's go back to the text. Now we've got another 2 weeks, last 2 weeks. Where's the text? We got to page 93, 91. Okay. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Sustained by compassion, right? Just even before attaining Bodhisattva. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. We talked, the last thing we discussed was why bodhisattvas, when they directly realize emptiness, so just as hearers and solitary realize emptiness, experience emptiness directly, there's no difference. So experiencing the ultimate nature of all phenomena directly, there's no difference, but how come that this mind in the continuum of a bodhisattva eliminates more than only the afflictions or only the obscurations to liberation? How come that it also eliminates obscurations to enlightenment, to Buddhahood? So we've heard one reason is to do with wisdom, the other to do with method. Wisdom, as Lama Tsongkhapa explains, it has to do with wisdom in the sense, as he had explained earlier, in the first part of the text that we covered in the spring. There's this quote where it says, bodhisattvas, when they have realized emptiness, they're not satisfied with just that. So they realize emptiness for the first time on the basis of reasoning, understand phenomena do not exist intrinsically, do not exist from their own side, based on a particular reasoning. But then once they realized emptiness conceptually or inferentially for the first time, they still apply more reasoning. Again, they apply innumerable. It said innumerable, like countless. Of course, countless doesn't mean literally infinite reasonings, but rather it means a lot of different reasonings. So over and over again, they think about, reflect on emptiness. And in that way, the strength of their understanding, the scope of their, or the strength of their understanding is greater than that of hearers and solitary realizers. But that's not the only reason. Okay, so this is what we mentioned before. Bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation. So as it was explained in the homage section, even before attaining direct realizations, bodhisattvas on the path of accumulation and preparation, the first two stages, cultivate an exceptionally vast and penetrating understanding of emptiness, employing innumerable lines of reasoning to analyze both the selfnesses of persons and the selfnesses of phenomena other than persons. Therefore, even after they have first realized emptiness inferentially, they continue to familiarize themselves with this conceptual understanding through countless reasoning. Such extensive analytical training sharpens their understanding, their intelligence, rendering their subsequent direct realization of emptiness even more profound and far-reaching in scope. So, having said this is important, of course, to eliminate the cognitive obscurations, the obscurations to Buddhahood. In that, bodhisattvas have to develop a highly potent meditative equipoise, very potent direct realization of emptiness, one that is capable of actually eradicating those subtle obstructions. So it's on the lower levels, from the first to the seventh ground, this realization, so when they, on the lower levels, means on the first ground, from the first ground up to the seventh ground. So first ground starts on the path of seeing, then all the way up to the path of meditation, but only up to the seventh level, seventh ground. So on the lower levels, from the first to the seventh ground, their direct realization of emptiness cannot, of course, remove the obstructions to Buddhahood yet. It's only the obstructions to liberation. But it gradually strengthens through the combined force of wisdom and merit. The aspect of wisdom that fortifies this realization, this gnosis, arises from having applied these innumerable reasonings, as just explained, to establish emptiness on the bodhisattva path of accumulation and preparation. So that's what strengthens the wisdom aspect, and therefore that direct realization. While the aspect of merit, having accumulated this positive potential, that again supports the direct realization of emptiness. And where does that come from? From the vast stores of virtue accumulated through great compassion and bodhicitta. I guess also the other practices as well. So the kind of method aspect of the path supports this, of course, and actually also the motivation, the aspiration to become a Buddha. This is not mentioned in the text, but it's really, I want to become a Buddha. That's my goal, driven by this incredible compassion. Again, as we heard last time, becoming a Buddha is just a means to an end. It is in order to be of greatest benefit to all sentient beings. So it's the force of that great compassion that strengthens the realization of emptiness, so that it can eliminate more than just what needs to be overcome to become liberated. It should be noted that unlike the other tenet systems, so the Satantrika, the Vaibhashika, and so forth, Chittamatra, mind only, the Prasangika Madhyamika school asserts that selflessness and emptiness are synonymous. I'm saying this here because Lama Tsongkhapa here uses the word selflessness, and for those of you who may wonder why that term is suddenly employed, and especially if you studied from the point of view of the other schools, then you're not familiar with using the word selflessness and emptiness interchangeably. In the lower schools, what is selflessness in the lower schools? What is selflessness? The lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. Or, even coarser than that, permanent, partless, independent self. Like, so the absence of a permanent, partless, independent self, or the absence of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, right? It's all based on, in the Prasangika school, these two types of selflessness, of course, exist, but they're considered coarse. Even subtler is the lack of, what is even subtler in the Prasangika school? Subtler than the lack of a permanent, partless, independent self. Subtler than a self-sufficient, the lack of a self-sufficient, subtler than the lack of a permanent, partless, independent self. Subtler than the lack of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. What is even subtler?
Negating true existence without negating inherent existence.
Pardon?
Negating true existence without negating inherent existence.
In the Prasangika school?
Like you asked what is subtler, or you meant like negating inherent existence?
In the Prasangika school, only in the Prasangika school. So what is the subtlest type of selflessness when it comes to the person?
A lack of inherent existence.
Yeah, a lack of inherently, intrinsically existent I. Okay. Let's just, to better understand these three types of selflessness again, because they're a little difficult, they're so wordy. Let's better understand them by starting with the subtlest type of selflessness, the lack of intrinsic existence. We all have an innate sense that there is some essence there we call I. At the very least, there's a sense there's something there. That is not the mind, that is not the body, there's something intrinsic within me, something I'm born with, some essence. And we have the same sense for other things as well. There's some essence, there's something in this object in front of me that I call a table. There's some tableness. It's the only thing I can say in Hebrew. I can say table yud. I know in Hebrew yud kind of means that ness. So tableness or a cupness. The sense is there's something that's not the parts. There's something in there that makes it a cup. And that's why I call it a cup. It's not that this is a cup because I call it a cup. No, the other way around. It's got this essence. If you ask me to pinpoint it, I'll have a hard time doing that. But there's still a sense it's there. And especially when it comes to me, there's an essence there. That is the subtlest level. Subtle, why? Because it's least obvious to us. It's the least obvious to us. It's the hardest to pinpoint. Of course, it's not there, but still, if you were to ask me, what is your sense of an I? I'll probably talk about qualities that I have. How am I going to, an essence? If I'm not trained in philosophy, I would never talk about an essence or something. I don't know. There's something there. So that's the subtlest sense. This is really when our I is quiet, when it's not rebelling, when it's not like, I need this, I need that, they dare to say this to me, and so forth, right? The whole story. But then at times, when it's stirred up, we feel unjustly accused of something, or even praised, when we're praised, right? There's a strong sense, there's an I. And there's also an I, there's a sense of an I that's the owner of mind and body, right? Like the I, of course our language seems to support that, although actually it doesn't support it. But because we believe in this essence, this separate essence, therefore we believe the language also supports it. So we say I, and so, okay, it's not just a labeled I, not just we designated it mentally. No, there is really something, and that something controls my mind and body. So when I meditate, there's a sense my mind is meditating, but there's also an I that's doing the same thing. Explain to me how it does that. No one can explain that. Because of course we say the I is meditating, merely labeled on the basis of the mind doing so. There's not like a transparent I that's kind of like also meditating there on its own. It's really the mind. It's basically the mind. Of course, with the assistance of the body, no doubt. But what we call that which is meditating is the mind. Yet it feels like the I does the whole thing. And it keeps the body straight. And that's the one that's walking. Actually, our body is walking, our legs are walking, but it feels like this I is also being picked up, kind of walking away, kind of legless, I guess, or like, yeah, it's the owner of the legs, so it uses the legs, but it's not the leg, so there's also an I kind of made to walk. That's how it feels. So it's a utilizer, it's the controller of mind and body. And that's usually, when it comes to an innate sense of a self, they have these two levels. These are the innate types. There's some essence there, the subtlest level of a sense of an I, and then a slightly coarser version is the owner, the utilizer, the controller of mind and body. Like a king and his subjects, like a prime minister, like a president and his ministers, for instance, or president and her ministers, whatever the gender. Okay, now that is the coarser type, but these are all innate. We're born with that sense. However, based on our beliefs, on our philosophical understanding, philosophical assertions, based of course mainly on our sense of intrinsic existence in the first place, there's also an intellectually acquired version of that the I exists separate from mind and body, independently. We don't have an innate sense of that. Innately, it doesn't feel that way, because innately we see the connection between mind and body. It doesn't feel as if as if the mind was like a pea in a pot. The pot being mind and body, the pea being the I, and you can take it out anytime. That's not how it feels. It feels like mind and body and the self are inseparably connected, which is why we don't have an innate sense of I being independent of mind and body. But we can develop an intellectually acquired sense of such a self, which could be reflected, as I said many times, in the possibly Christian idea of a soul. The soul leaves mind and body, and what's left behind is just this. Yeah, even the mind is probably left behind. I'm not sure. I don't think in Christianity they talk about the mind continuing as well. It's the soul that moves on. Then in modern psychology, Freud's ego, superego, and there's a third one which I always forget. Anyway, so that's the sense of an I that exists separate from mind and body. We mentioned the permanent part, this independent self, because in the non-Buddhist systems that existed, most importantly at the time of the Buddha, they asserted such a self. At the time of the Buddha, many non-Buddhist systems, the Mimamsakas, we talked about them before, they asserted a permanent I that was partless, that was not, it didn't own the parts of mind and body. Those were not a part of the I, because they were left behind upon death. So it didn't have any parts. Mind and body were not its parts. It was permanent, and it existed independently of mind and body. That's how they explained reincarnation, right? Something moves on from one life to the next. What is it? It's that permanent part, this independent self. However, that's an intellectually formed idea of a self. It's not the innate sense of a self we have, right? So therefore, that permanent part, this independent that we mention so often, it's actually taken from the non-Buddhist philosophical schools that existed in India at the time of the Buddha. It's of course very important because we can compare the Buddhist view and the view of these non-Buddhist philosophers. But even nowadays, like I said, there are certain views. There's an I, there's a self, of course. You know, I travel to Asia to find myself and so forth. Very strong sense there's an I that's separate. Yet that's again, there's an intellectual type that we may have created over time, but then based on that innate sense, either self-sufficient, substantially existent, in other words, a controller, a utilizer, or a subtler version, some essence there. Okay? And that essence there, that sense of an essence there, that is the subtlest type. Okay? And we have that with regard to everything. Everything appears like that. Everything. Whatever we see, whatever we hear, it seems to have some essence that comes from the side of the object. All right. And that absence of such an essence, which from a Prasangika school point of view doesn't make any sense, the absence of that is called emptiness. It's empty of such an essence, or selflessness, where the self refers to the essence and saying essencelessness, basically. Right? Phenomena are labeled, merely labeled, but they don't have an essence existing from their own side, independent of anything else. All right. Having said this, so it should be noted that unlike the other tenet systems, the Prasangika Madhyamika school asserts that selflessness and emptiness are synonymous. Hence, the two kinds of selflessness referred to here in Lama Tsongkhapa's text, illuminating the intent, which is the selflessness of persons, and the selflessness of all other phenomena, refer respectively to the lack of intrinsic existence of persons and of phenomena other than persons. Okay. So this was the second part. Again, we're actually here, or Lama Tsongkhapa is here discussing without yet talking about the root text. Not yet the text is not yet talking about the root text. That comes soon. But it's kind of an introduction to what does a bodhisattva ground mean. What does the first ground, second and third and so forth, what do they have in common? So we've heard about the nature of a ground being uncontaminated, especially in terms of talking about the direct realization of emptiness, which is the most important aspect of each ground, because we differentiate these grounds mainly upon the different realizations of emptiness in terms of which obscurations they've eliminated. So if you eliminated a particular obstructions, you arise from the meditation, and then you enter again into a meditative equipoise, and then you have to move on to the next ground. You get rid of something, arise from the meditation, do other practices as well, but most importantly, you remove some of the afflictions that are not in the nature of the mind, of course. And in that way, you move on through honestly, 10 grounds is not such a big deal if you think about it. I mean, getting there, it could be 100, it could be 1,000, but it's only 10. Of course, it's really difficult to get there. But yeah, it's not as hard as you would expect. I mean, in terms of at least, so many stages. Of course, there are sub-levels as well. But the point is here, yes, so the essence of these grounds is their direct experience of emptiness. And these are uncontaminated. We've learned about that as part of the nature. They're also sustained by something very important. That was the previous outline, or the previous section. What is it sustained by? By great compassion. So great compassion, this emphasis on great compassion, it keeps the bodhisattva going. It's that motivation. Remember I said last time, great compassion in the beginning, in the second verse of Chandrakirti's text, Acharya Chandrakirti's text, it says compassion is important in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end. Right? I would say it's even important for us, especially as Westerners, being drawn to the Dharma. Right? So before we even engage in bodhisattva practices, so that being the beginning, and then the middle is when you're on the bodhisattva path, and then the end when you're a Buddha. No, even before you even start practicing, I think for a lot of us, we came to this particular tradition of Buddhism because we like the emphasis on great compassion. I don't know if that's true for everyone, But I remember in my case, that was definitely, wow, so much compassion, it's heartwarming. So without wanting to practice it, I just thought, that's beautiful, that's beautiful. Therefore, great compassion is the most important mind that sustains these practices of a bodhisattva. Okay, so that was the second part. Of the 4 features that we're just going through of a bodhisattva ground. That was the second type. And then the third type, and that's on page 93, the heading here is, or the third feature is, how the uncontaminated gnosis, that direct realization of emptiness, comes to be called ground. Okay. So first, Lama Tsongkhapa, in his Illuminating the Intent, says, the phrase from the commentary cited above, from the auto commentary, when divided in terms of its facets, means that it, the ground, is one and the same uncontaminated gnosis, which is the whole. That is being differentiated in terms of stages, with earlier and later parts becoming the individual facets. The translation is great, but it's just very ancient Tibetan. So the English is difficult to understand. So explaining this short phrase here by Lama Tsongkhapa, in Acharya Chandrakirti's auto commentary on what text? On what text? Auto commentary of what? Pardon? Yeah, Madhavika. So entering the middle way, yes. Entering the middle way. Okay, so Acharya Chandrakirti himself says, he explains the third defining feature of the Bodhisattva grounds with the phrase, when divided in terms of its facets. We had the phrase, we had the quote before. So basically, Acharya Chandrakirti's auto commentary explains 4 features that every ground shares. And these are now extensively explained. The first 2 we covered, now number 3. What does Chandrakirti say? When divided in terms of its facets. This indicates that although the 10 grounds do not differ with respect to the gnosis directly realizing emptiness, of course, we've heard that many times, since that meditative acupoint remains the same throughout all 10 bodhisattva levels in terms of its object and how it realizes it. Right? Object is the same. How it realizes, how it realizes its object directly. So that's always the same. The grounds, these different grounds, can nonetheless be distinguished by their different facets. For instance, the strength of each mind, the strength of the gnosis that directly realizes emptiness, varies according to the type of obstruction it serves as a direct antidote to. Right? So, like I said that before. But this text is also quite repetitive. It says things again and again and again. And that's the Tibetan style of teaching. To really understand it, we need to hear it again and again. So yes, there is a difference, not in terms of what the object is or how it's realized, but the strength of each mind. Because it can eliminate subtler and subtler types of obstructions. Ever subtler types of obstructions. These distinctions give rise to the tenfold structure of the Bodhisattva grounds. So we have 10 Bodhisattva grounds. The 10 grounds thus represent successive stages of the same non-dual gnosis, non-dual mind, which eliminates obstructions in a graded sequence. First, the various degrees of afflictive obstructions to liberation, so from the 1st to the 7th ground, and then the progressively subtler levels of cognitive obstructions to Buddhahood, from the 8th to the 10th ground. Another way the 10 grounds can be differentiated by their facets is explained below through their 4 distinctive features. There are 4 distinctive features. They're going to be explained soon. Because these 10 levels can thus be presented in such differentiated stages, they're referred to as grounds. And then the etymology, that's the last feature that they share, the etymology of the term ground. The etymology of the term ground. So what does Lama Tsongkhapa say about that? These are referred to as grounds, these 10 grounds, because they serve as the locus or basis for the bodhisattva's qualities. They resemble the ground in this sense, and hence the epithet ground. Epithet. These statements indicate that all 10 ultimate grounds are to be posited on the basis of non-conceptual gnosis alone. Okay, that's Lama Tsongkhapa's explanation. And then to explain that, again going back to Acharya Chandikirti's auto-commentary, that basically started this whole process of explaining the 4 features. So Lama Chandrakirti previously explains or has explained the 4th feature, the etymology or meaning of the term ground, with the words, it acquires the name ground, for it constitutes the locus of the qualities. So what does that mean? Well, with these words he was indicating that the 10 bodhisattva levels are so called. Why? Because they function as a basis or foundation. Just as the physical ground provides the support on which things rest and grow, the direct realization of emptiness, the uncontaminated gnosis, serves as the foundation upon which all of a bodhisattva's extraordinary qualities are established and cultivated. So that means that the 10 grounds, they're not just arbitrary labels. It's not just we call it ground for whatever reason. No, but there are names for the levels where these qualities take root and can flourish. So ground as in like where something can take root and be further developed. Each ground serves as the locus for their arising and maturation, resembling the earth in its function of supporting and sustaining the growth of compassion, wisdom, and the other perfections. That's why they're given the designation ground. Okay, so that's why the etymology. And in that way we now understand, okay, number 1, every ground here is characterized by that direct realization. It's uncontaminated. We discussed in great detail why it's uncontaminated. And something else we discussed, very, very important, that this uncontaminated wisdom realizing emptiness is kind of the vacuum cleaner. It vacuum cleans whatever is not in the nature of our mind. And very important, Lama Tsongkhapa emphasized this a lot, and we discussed it in great detail, that they can be removed. All our faults and limitations can be removed from the mind. There are some that assert that's not possible. However, this stands in contradiction with the Buddhist understanding that all our faults can be removed. Lama Tsongkhapa cited Arya Nagarjuna's beautiful praise to Dhammadhatu, in praise to the ultimate expanse, where he uses that analogy. Remember the analogy that was used of the fire? The chainmail armor. Or we've actually, I guess we could say asbestos armor. Like looking at the term, the Tibetan word in particular, which kind of means asbestos. Yeah, in some dictionaries I found it to be called asbestos. And I've also given you the historical kind of accounts of like the Chinese, in the Chinese tradition of the Wei dynasty, that talk about this fire laundered armor. Which apparently, that was in the Wei dynasty, but then at the time of, like around the beginning of this century, beginning of not century, the beginning of this millennium. At the beginning of, so around Christ's birth, so I can't think of a better word. The Romans knew about this material, and so did the Han Chinese, but apparently came from the Romans. So asbestos apparently came from the Romans, went to China, and they talk about this cloth, when you put it in fire, it turns white and clean. So its quality is enhanced. And then, of course, we heard of this bishop, this Christian kind of missionary who talked about this cloth was also available in India. And based on that, we can assume that when Arya Nagarjuna talks about asbestos armor, but actually it was known in India. It's just because it's not really, I haven't really seen it, at least in the translations that I'm familiar with, I haven't seen asbestos. Well, I should look at the other translations, but yeah, I've only followed to Tunjimbas, and he calls it chainmail armor. And I don't want to put that in the fire. I mean, like maybe for a short period of time, and maybe it cleans it for some time. But anyway, never mind. Whatever is the armor, the point is it gets totally cleaned. Here, likewise, our mind can be burned by the fire of the direct realization, and eliminate in that way all the faults and limitations can be gradually eliminated. So a very important point, which a lot of people, a lot of philosophers didn't hold in India. The Mimamsakas, the Charvakas. So basically one of the essential points in Buddhism. Essential. I mean, if you think about it, if it wasn't possible to get rid of the afflictions, we would practice Buddhism just to feel better from day to day. like a painkiller. We would use Buddhism just like as a painkiller, because we could just temporarily get rid of some of our anxiety, of our suffering, etc., but we would never be able to remove it. Okay. So anyway, having said this, therefore we've learned about the nature of the different grounds being uncontaminated. We've heard about being sustained by great compassion. We've heard why we differentiate between these grounds in terms of the facets, and we heard about the etymology of the term ground. Actually, the third says how uncontaminated gnosis comes to be called ground. That's what it literally says in Tibetan. And then the fourth says the etymology. Number 3 and number 4 seem to be the same thing in terms of the heading, at least. The heading that's from the text, how the uncontaminated gnosis comes to be called ground. And then the fourth one says the same thing. But actually the third one talks more about why they're divided into 10 grounds. Right, you have the division, although they're the same in terms of realizing emptiness. Okay. All right, and then Lama Tsongkhapa says again, although they're all equal in being non-conceptual gnosis, at least when it comes to the direct realization of emptiness, now he points out the differences. The manner in which the grounds, such as the first one called perfect joy, are defined as distinct grounds is by means of the following 4 features. Okay, that's Lama Tsongkhapa. And then just to explain that, since, as mentioned many times, the 10 bodhisattva grounds are characterized by states of meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, they do not differ in that regard. However, they are defined as distinct grounds because of 4 distinguishing features. These features mark the stages apart and allow each ground to be individually identified. Okay, what's the first one? Lama Tsongkhapa says the first feature, or the first distinctive feature, arises on the basis of progressive increment in the number of qualities, such that there exists the set of 12 qualities in 100-fold on the first ground, the set of 12 in 1,000-fold on the second, and so on. These will be described below. Okay, what does that mean? The first distinct feature of the grounds is that they can be distinguished by the progressive increase in the bodhisattva's qualities. With each successive level, the number and magnitude of these qualities expand. Now with the numbers, we don't have to take it that literally. It's not like 100 exactly. It's, it's like we take it really literally, because in the West, we're all into numbers and it's pretty precise. When Tibetans say 100, it doesn't always mean, I mean, can you think of a prayer, very famous prayer that also has 100 in it? It's not, doesn't really mean 100. It's, in English, it's often translated as 100, but it shouldn't be 100.
Praise to Manjushri?
Praise to Manjushri? Where does it say 100 in the title?
Not in the title.
Yes, Lama Tsongkhapa. What's it called?
Tsongkhapa's, I do it every night.
Where do you live? Where do you live? In Tushita. What's the name of the 100 deities of Tushita? But actually it's hundreds of deities. It's not literally 100, like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, okay, 100 there. No, it's hundreds. Yeah, Gandil Hagyama. Yeah, Gandil Hagyama, exactly. In Tibetan it's called Gandil Hagyama. Gandin Tushita, La, deity. Gya means means 100 or hundreds. And Ma is just to say these are the first 3 words of this prayer. And so the first 3 words of the prayer, you add a Ma, and then you have Gandil Hagyama. Gandil Hagi, and so forth, so in Tibetan. Anyway, the point is that it's hundreds. Oftentimes we like to translate it as 100, but it's like, why are there only 100 deities in Tushita? So a lot of the time it's like, it just means a lot. And here we hear that with each successive level, so on the first level you have 100, and then you have 1,000. And then every time you add a 0, you have 10,000, and you have 100,000. It's not, it's not like I can really count them. It's like, oh, one is missing. That person is not a first ground bodhisattva yet. No, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, on the first ground, the bodhisattva possesses a set of 12 qualities. And there are more, of course, but there are certain qualities that are considered really important. On the second, those same qualities appear in 1,000-fold. And this pattern continues through the higher ground. So in other words, they expand more and more and more and more, right? So we take it so literally in the West when we hear these numbers. But basically you could be saying like there are about 12 qualities and they just keep magnifying, they keep increasing. But maybe it's nice to have something to point at, like 100-fold. Yeah, anyway. So therefore, while the direct realization of emptiness remains identical in kind, as in like realizing emptiness and so forth, across all 10 levels, the spiritual capacities and perfections that arise from it grow in strength and extend, providing a clear basis for differentiating one ground from another. Okay, so those different grounds, yes, they're characterized by their direct realization, but there's so much more to every ground, right? Okay, it will become clear as we go through the distinctive features. Then Lama Tsongkhapa says the second distinctive feature pertains to the ever-increasing enhancement of excellent power. I mean, we don't think of a bodhisattva as having power so much, right? I mean, when we think of His Holiness, we think just kindness and smiling, but His Holiness is so powerful. His Holiness is so powerful, and I'm pretty sure those of you who've been around long enough, when you witness His Holiness talk to people, wow, this power, this strength, it's overwhelming. Sometimes when He walks into a room, it's like people are like, I mean, He's got that incredible kindness and love and so forth, but there's also this power. And those are the 3 qualities of a Buddha: wisdom, compassion, and power. Yeah. Power is very important. The self-confidence. I mean, confident people are powerful, aren't they? They have this self-confidence. Nothing can weaken them in their convictions and so forth. Now, this is just a silly, worldly example. But you think of like a Buddha, like having this incredible, no matter what people say. No, they know. They have a first-hand understanding, of course, and they have the power to affect people in a very profound way. Okay, so the second distinct feature pertains to the ever-increasing enhancement of excellent power. Although some describe this in terms of the shaking of 100 realms, 1,000 realms, and so on, this ability is actually included in the increment of the number of qualities, the previous qualities, these 12 qualities that keep increasing. One of them is shaking 100 realms. I've always asked my teacher this, and no one said it's that, but it's definitely not causing an earthquake. I mean, shaking, it really says shaking. They use the word that you would use when the earth shakes, But of course that can't mean that. And so usually the assertion is that just moving, I mean, really moving worlds in the sense that they're greatly affected by the activities of a particular bodhisattva. But anyway, these shaking the worlds has nothing to do with the power here. This is not part of the power. It thus appears to pertain instead to the ever-increasing power of the individual grounds, their power to cleanse pollutants and traverse the path. Yeah, so that's again power to remove some of the afflictions. And in the explanation here it says, the second distinctive feature concerns the ever-increasing power that characterizes each successive level. As a bodhisattva progresses through the 10 grounds, or through the grounds, their spiritual strength and capacity continually intensify. Some sources describe this as the ability to stir, or profoundly move 100 realms, 1,000 realms, and so on. However, that quality actually falls under the first feature, one of the 12 multiplied qualities mentioned above. What truly defines the second feature is the growing potency of the grounds themselves, the ever greater strength of the bodhisattva's non-dual gnosis, the meditative act proposed strictly realizing emptiness to purify obscurations. That means intellectually acquired afflictive obstructions are removed on the first ground, innate afflictive obstructions from the second to the seventh, and cognitive obstructions on the final 3 grounds. Okay, so on the first ground, intellectually acquired ones, all the ones that we acquired in this lifetime. And then the innate ones, they're gradually eliminated from the second to the seventh. And lastly, for the last 3 grounds, 8, 9, and 10, cognitive obstructions. This progressive purification enables the bodhisattva to advance ever more swiftly along the path toward Buddhahood. In essence, this feature highlights the deepening transformative power of the grounds. With each level, the bodhisattva's realization becomes increasingly effective in cleansing the mind and bringing it closer to full awakening. So it's like a total cleansing of the mind. It's like a transformation from the point of view of bringing out the actual nature of the mind by removing what's not in the nature of consciousness. That was the second distinctive quality. So on the basis of that, we can differentiate. And I already mentioned that. It's already actually, the different facets in terms of, I said initially, maybe I can just leave that out as part of that explanation, because that's really the second distinctive feature, right? Like removing more and more obscuration. So, yeah. I've based this on the teachings that I received, like listening to different teachings, and that's what it was like one teacher mentioned. You can look at it from the point of view of just removing more and more obscuration, or from the point of view of the 4 distinctive features. But then the second distinctive feature is exactly that, removing the obscurations. So maybe I'll change that. Then the third distinctive feature pertains to the feature of excellence with respect to the perfections. Yeah, excellence with respect to the perfections. Excellence in the perfection of generosity on the first ground. There should be a full stop. Excellence in the perfection of generosity. I have to check it out again. Like I copy-pasted the text on here, like Lama Tsongkhapa's text. There may have been a mistake. I'll check it. So the third, Lama Tsongkhapa says, the third pertains to the feature of excellence with respect to the perfections. Excellence in the perfection of generosity on the first ground, excellence in the perfection of morality on the second ground, and so on. So what does Lama Tsongkhapa mean by saying that? The third distinctive feature focuses on the excellence of the perfections that are emphasized or reach their peak on each level. So although Bodhisattva practices all 10 perfections, usually we just refer to 6 perfections, but there are actually 10. Generosity, morality, patience, and so forth. We'll go through all of them later, and I've already listed them earlier on, at some earlier point. So although bodhisattvas practice all 10 perfections throughout the entire path, each ground is distinguished by one perfection that becomes especially prominent, refined, or complete at that stage. So there's one that's particularly excellent. What would be the perfection on the first ground? Pardon?
Yeah, actually I'm confused. Didn't we say before it was joy, and here he says it's generosity?
Oh, joy. What do you mean with joy? Is joy one of the perfections?
Joy is effort. Joy is effort, yeah.
But joy is effort and joy, are they the same?
No, I know. I know joy is effort, sorry.
No, it's fine. No, it's better if I debate with you. So if instead of saying, no, they're not the same, I'm asking you, are they the same? And you come to the conclusion, no, joy is effort, is not joy. Joy is effort, is not joy. The first ground is called joy. Why? It's called perfect joy, as Thupten Jinpa calls it, perfect joy, or another translation would be utmost joy, great joy. That's the name of the first ground. And as we'll cover soon, there's a reason for that. You realize emptiness directly for the first time. You get rid of some of the crap, on your mind. And you come out and you're like, why? I mean, there's joy that you never experienced before. What a relief. We can never be truly joyful because we always worry about I and mine. We can never fully relax. But someone who's realized emptiness directly, what a relief. Yeah, and so that joy that before the Bodhisattva has never known, like when they were an ordinary person, had never known such joy, which is why this particular stage, or this particular ground is called great joy. Isn't that wonderful? The first level, joy. Something to look forward to. Okay, but what is the perfection that is mainly practiced on that level? Generosity. Yeah, generosity. So we go through each one of them. What is generosity? How is it practiced? And Acharya Chandrakirti has a very unique way of explaining it, but he also explains that it reaches a peak. It reaches a particular excellence on that level. And why that is true, we'll find out. However, this is true for every level. So throughout the entire path, each ground is distinguished by one perfection that becomes especially prominent, refined, or complete at that stage. Oh, there it says. For example, on the first ground, generosity attains its highest excellence. On the second, morality. On the third, patience, and so on. Culminating in the perfection of gnosis on the 10th ground. So the 10th perfection is not just wisdom, but that exalted wisdom that I describe here as gnosis, because that's the word, that's the term that Geshe Jinpa uses in his translation. So therefore, this feature highlights how the Bodhisattva's cultivation of the perfections unfolds in a progressive and structured manner. Generosity is easier than morality. Morality is easier than patience, all the way. Yeah. So there's a progressive and structured manner, or the perfections unfold in a progressive and structured manner, which each level serving as the principal stage or the full maturation of a particular perfection, while the others continue to be cultivated alongside them, or alongside it. So you continue to practice all the other ones, but during every level, some excellence is attained. So full maturation, a certain level of maturation. Maybe full maturation is really what you attain once you become a Buddha, but a certain level of maturation, an excellent kind of maturation. Yeah. That's the third distinctive feature that Lama Tsongkhapa describes. And then what about the fourth one? The fourth distinctive feature pertains to the ever-enhancing fruitional effects. This might mean, on the first ground, being born as a monarch that reigns over the earth. Again, like, what? On the second ground, being born as a monarch that reigns over the 4 continents and so on. This is symbolic. This needs to be taken. I mean, it is something that you find in the sutras, There was a certain way of putting it, but I think it's meant symbolically. So the fourth distinctive feature highlights the progressive enhancement of the 10 grounds fruitional effects, that is the increasing excellence of the results or attainments that arise from each level. We had already the 12 powers, the 12 abilities or qualities, but again, they're different, the different qualities. So to stir, influence positively, that's something different. But here, I guess it's also the sutras explain them differently. They explain power, they explain the 12 qualities, and then this kind of possibly political power, I don't know. And again, everyone has a slightly different view on this, but hopefully this will make sense. As the Bodhisattva ascends the grounds, not only do their inner realizations deepen, but the outer manifestations of their merit and wisdom also become more vast and powerful. Traditional texts illustrate this with examples of worldly sovereignty. On the first ground, the Bodhisattva may be reborn as a monarch ruling over a single world, on the second as one ruling over 4 worlds. And this pattern continues, symbolizing ever greater influence. The point here is not worldly power for its own sake, but to indicate that as bodhisattvas advance, their capacity to benefit beings and the scope of their positive influence naturally expand. Here we cannot just think of this world. Because then you're like, which world? What are you talking about? 1 world, 4 worlds? Of course, from a Buddhist point of view, I mean, the understanding is so vast. Reading Buddhist cosmology, it's like there are so many different galaxies, so many different worlds. And in some passages, like even the Buddhist followers, like going to these places, being able to actually go there, communicate. I mean, the good thing is in the 21st century, it doesn't seem as far-fetched as it may have felt, I don't know, 2,600 years ago. Like other worlds, you could hardly, didn't even know how large India was, or didn't even know how large this entire world was. It was round, etc. People weren't aware of that. But at the 21st century, with modern science and the idea that this is just one galaxy and there are, I don't know how many millions of galaxies in this universe, it makes total sense. I mean, how could we think it's just us in such a large universe? And that's something the Buddha has talked about, 2,600 years ago. Yeah, definitely, there's so many other forms of life, other worlds similar to ours, where Buddhas may be teaching at this point, right now teaching, or where there's no religion at all exists. I mean, going through different levels of development. Okay, so the point here is not worldly power for its own sake, but the influence. So each ground brings about greater karmic results and broader benefit, reflecting the growing reach of their compassion and wisdom. Thus, the fruitional results of the path steadily increase, demonstrating the Bodhisattva's ever-deepening ability to bring welfare to others. I think that's probably the most important point. You have more and more ability, can affect more and more sentient beings. And even if it's limited in this world, well, I'm thinking, what does His Holiness do in other worlds? I mean, if His Holiness is like a Buddha, okay, everything's different anyway. But as a Bodhisattva, already, definitely His Holiness has reached the level of the path of seeing, at the very least. So then he has lots of emanations. It's one of the 12-fold qualities that you can emanate in different forms. I said this last time, it seems so weird, this idea you can be 100 people at the same time. But in a way, it makes total sense that I can be just one person. It makes sense that I can only exist as this one being with this particular mind and one body. Why? Because I'm like this. Like I'm wearing what are they called? Blinkers? Right? They're called blinkers. Yeah, like Scheuklappen. So wearing blinker, as in like, I can only see I, me, and mine. I'm so just focused on others. I mean, surely I meet other people and I know some people, but my relationship to everyone else is measured upon what I want, right? You're my friend, you're my enemy. It depends on my self-centeredness. You harm me, you're my enemy. You benefit me, you're my friend, right? But if I'm able to let go of that, and I'm not just focused on this I, me, and mine, then my mind expands, doesn't it? Your mind expands. So right now, I'm just worried about my problems. I'm just worried about my problems. If I worry about your problem, then only if they affect me. Isn't that interesting? I mean, like, look at the elections. Why? Just the other day, I listened to, I think it was the BBC. I listened to the BBC and they were talking about elections in the US right now, like Democrats and Republicans. And they were saying, well, basically you just win an election if you can promise better economic wealth. It comes down to that. Because people are struggling, people, you know, a lot of people don't have enough money, and materialism is the new religion, if you like, the new philosophy. And so in the end, whether it's Trump or someone else, it depends on what goes into our own personal pockets. I mean, that's the way we think. It reflects our human existence. So it all comes down to just this one thing, that one me. So I can only be one person. I only manifest in that form because I'm just focused on that one thing. If, however, I'm able to reduce my self-centeredness and develop cherishing what's it called? Cherishing others. No. Yeah. That's what it's called, right? Cherishing others. Yeah. Ranchinsin, Shenshinsin. Yeah, in Tibetan, Shenshinsin. So the mind that cherishes all other sentient beings. Then, my mind expands. It looks outwards. It's not just me. No, it's so much vaster. And I also used this example before, like sometimes extreme examples help to exemplify that better. You know, expand, your mind expands and it becomes more perceptive. Think of a person who's really, really self-obsessed. I mean, usually we don't see ourselves as being that. We see it in others, we recognize it in others better. But we probably all know someone who just thinks only of themselves. And the funny thing is they interpret everything with, like, in terms of themselves. So when other people talk, they feel, oh, they're talking about me. Or when other people, I don't know, say something, oh, they probably want, they always believe it revolves around them, in other words, right? Other people gossiping, they gossip about me. Other people, they're having the sense they're always thinking about me. So that shows again that our wisdom doesn't come out, our understanding, our intelligence can't come through if we only think of ourselves, because we don't become aware what others are doing. We always think everyone is just thinking of us. If then, on the other hand, that notion of just me is reduced, is reversed or at least reduced, you start seeing things very differently. So your mind really expands. And if the mind expands, why not have more than one body? Makes sense, doesn't it? You want to benefit other sentient beings. Right now, I just want to benefit me. I don't need one body to do that, right? I only need to, if I want to benefit myself, I mean, I'm really harming myself anyway. I just need one body. But if I want to benefit all sentient beings, not only does my mind expand, but also through the aspiration, I can have many bodies. And then it makes sense. It actually makes sense that you have more than one body. We need it. So here, in this case, a bodhisattva takes on more and more bodies. Anyway, so the scope of their influence, of course, also expands. And in that way, they develop an ever-deepening ability to bring back welfare to others. So in short, let's now summarize these 4 distinct features. While the 10 bodhisattva grounds share the same essence, the meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, they are differentiated by 4 features. First, the number of qualities multiplies, while the same set of virtues expanding of qualities, of 12 qualities, I should say. Of 12 qualities expand, of certain 12 qualities, which will be mentioned later, with the same set of virtues expanding in scale at each stage, number 1. Second, their transformative power intensifies, enhancing the strength of their non-dual gnosis to purify subtle obstructions and progress along the path. Third, each ground is marked by a special excellence in one of the perfections, such as generosity, morality, or patience. And fourth, the fruits of practice continually increase as the bodhisattva's influence, capacity to benefit others, and positive impact on the world steadily expand with each higher ground. All right. Okay. Therefore, with respect, and again, Lama Tsongkhapa now is saying, therefore, with respect to, or thus with respect to the non-conceptual gnosis of the individual grounds, given the great variety in their potency, such as in the number of qualities they possess, these grounds are defined as distinct. Nevertheless, since the qualities in the intervals between meditative equipoise of individual grounds must also be included as part of these respective grounds, these grounds should not be defined by their meditative equipoise alone. It is in this manner the individual grounds must be distinguished, even though these ultimate grounds do not differ whatsoever in their object or aspect of cognition. So previously Lama Tsongkhapa said the main part is the meditative equipoise, right? That's the main thing. And now he's saying, but don't forget, in the interval, something that you'll learn, or that we learn as we continue with this text, you enter in the meditative equipoise, then you come out again. You enter again, you come out again. And each of these levels are described separately. Okay, when you go in, what happens? We talked about this a little bit, the uninterrupted level, the level of release, that'll all be explained. But then when you come out, sometimes you may be out of this meditative equipoise for years, not be able to go back into it, maybe even lifetimes. It takes time. I mean, we have a very different sense of time because we're not used to future lives. We don't think about them. So everything has to happen in one lifetime. It's very funny when some people, like when they hear, for instance, they shouldn't practice Tantra right away. I mean, Tantra, of course, is very powerful and all that, but you need to be qualified for that. And a lot of Westerners, they can't wait to practice it because there's a sense, I need to finish it in this lifetime. It almost seems like an instinct, unless they do it all in this lifetime, there's nothing afterwards. Yeah, so if I don't do it now, when will I? Like, you have all these lifetimes ahead of you. Yeah, but you know, then why do you practice if there's no rebirth? Why do you practice? Who cares? If you go out of existence after death, then Dharma practice, you don't have to practice. Just enjoy. Right? I mean, what's the point? Yeah, I mean, enjoy means accumulate virtue because you feel happier, you feel calmer and so forth. It does bring us happiness even right now. But these serious practices, I mean, what if there's no reincarnation, how can there be liberation? So oftentimes we believe in the West there's liberation, but no reincarnation. What kind of liberation would that be in this lifetime? It's the same as dying, isn't it? You kind of go out of existence and that's it. Or is it like you become liberated in this lifetime and you continue on forever, but if you die, you're doomed. You go out of existence. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, so to conclude the explanation of this outline, now the explanation of what Lama Tsongkhapa says, so to conclude now the explanation of this particular outline, the 10 grounds can be differentiated, even from the point of view of their gnosis, of their meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness, since what distinguishes one ground from another is the potency of that realization, which types of obstructions it can eliminate, and how many qualities associated with it increase progressively. Thus, even though the object realized and the mode of realization remain the same, the potency and accompanying qualities of the realization differ from one ground to the next. Another factor is what happens in the intervals between each meditative equipoise. After bodhisattvas will rise from the gnosis directly realizing emptiness on one ground, and before entering the equipoise of a higher ground, they engage not only in practices of the method aspect of the path, such as great compassion, bodhicitta, and the perfections like generosity and morality, but also in practices of the wisdom aspect, such as cultivating the cognition of impermanence and other insights. They even realize emptiness conceptually. Although you've realized emptiness directly when you reach the first ground, upon the first ground onwards, you go back into the conceptual realization to train your mind. It seems like, why would you do that? But the texts are very clear. You continue to go back and continue to conceptually realize emptiness conceptually, and then arise from that again until your mind is ready to enter once again into a meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness. All of these likewise belong to that ground. So I could add that, such as the cultivation of impermanence. I left out the conceptual cognition of emptiness. I left it out. Do you think I should add it? Okay, I add it. Yeah, in a way, I should add. It makes sense. So all of these likewise belong to that ground. So all of them are part of this different ground. And so this is why, as Lama Tsongkhapa says, a ground is not only defined by its meditative equipoise, but also by the full range of practices and qualities associated with it. All right. So this gives us a good sense of the 10 grounds. There are different qualities. Yes, parts of it are a little bit repetitive, but it's just that style, saying it over and over again. It's not so much about understanding something that you haven't understood, but remembering it. Because if I say it again and again, trying to say it in different ways every time, but saying it again and again, then you're more likely to remember. And if you remember, then what comes later, because later it's not always repeated again and again. Now, the advantage we had when we studied was we debated it. And if you debated day in and day out for like 4 or 5 hours every day, then you really remember. It's very helpful for a memory. But in the meantime, just saying it a few times, I don't think, there's much of a harm. I mean, I ask you many times, do you think it's too repetitive? It's too repetitive. And so far, the consensus has been, no, it's not. And I got an email from Tao Seti. He also says, no, don't shorten it. It's okay. But I read it and I'm thinking, I've said it so many times. Yeah, for me. Yeah, okay. So for me. Yeah, so I won't change anything, no. All right. But then there's one beautiful kind of closing remark by Lama Tsongkhapa, talking about also of the inexpressible nature of these grounds, especially when it comes to the meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness. This is a quote, quite a popular quote. I've seen it in different texts, and in particular here, it's very fitting. So it's from the 10 Grounds Sutra. The 10 Grounds Sutra states, just as wise men, just as... I was like, what? Just as wise men cannot speak of or see the traces of birds soaring across the sky, the same is true of the grounds of the conqueror's children. And if one cannot speak of them, how can one hear of them? Okay, that's from the 10 Grounds Sutra. Then Lama Tsongkhapa explains this, saying, although birds soar through the empty skies, the wise people of the world cannot describe in words the traces of these birds, nor can they perceive such traces with their mind. Likewise, although the ultimate grounds, analogous to the birds, soar through the space-like ultimate nature of things, Aryas themselves cannot express how these grounds are traversed exactly the way they experience it, and so those who are listening to it certainly cannot hear it exactly as seen. This is stated in the sutra passage above. Okay, so that's Lama Tsongkhapa. So what does this mean? The 10 Grounds Sutra, and you remember in the beginning we talked a lot about this sutra, in that Acharya Chandrakirti based his root text, Entering the Middle Way, very much on this particular sutra. Because it talks about the 10 grounds, and that's what this text is talking about. So this particular sutra employs the vivid image of birds flying through the sky to illustrate the inexpressible nature of the grounds of the conqueror's children, which is another word for saying the bodhisattvas. Well, to be truthful, it says the sons of the bodhisattva, the sons of the Buddhas. But nowadays it's been changed to the children. It's a little weird. Conquerors, it uses actually the word for like kings, not kings exactly, but the ones that conquer us. The Tibetan word is like gelwa, so like a conqueror. And then the son of a conqueror is called se, which is like honorific for son. So almost like princes, the princes of the conquerors. But of course the conquerors here are called the Buddhas, conquerors of the afflictions, of their own limitations, their own mental limitations. And the children are those followers of the Buddhas in the form of bodhisattvas. Okay, so what is the inexpressible nature of the grounds of the Buddhas is described in the form of this analogy. When birds soar through open space, no visible trace or path remains that can be seen or described. So after they flew through, there's nothing left. It's not like an airplane when you have like sometimes, what is it called, that leaves behind this white strip. Condensation from the airplane. So in the case of birds, that doesn't happen. So where the birds have flown, you can't point out where the birds have flown or what marks they have left behind. Likewise, the Bodhisattva's progress through the 10 grounds cannot be fully conceived or articulated. Their realization unfolds within the vast space-like expanse of ultimate truth, which is beyond conceptual thought and language. So we talk about emptiness the whole time, but it's beyond words, of course. Emptiness cannot be conveyed in such a way that just hearing about it, you understand it. Like, no way. So it cannot be fully conceived or articulated. It's beyond thought and language. The birds, which symbolize the bodhisattva grounds, move through the sky just as bodhisattvas advance through successive direct realizations of emptiness associated with the various grounds. And just as the sky retains no trace of the birds that pass through it, the ultimate grounds leave no discernible marks that can be grasped by ordinary perception. So nothing is left, there's no marks, no trace. And it cannot be grasped, first of all, by ordinary perception or even conveyed in words. So even the Aryas, even those who experience it, even those who experience these states, they cannot express them exactly as they are. Why? Because their realization transcends conceptual thought. It transcends language. If those who directly know them cannot describe them, then those who merely hear of them certainly cannot apprehend them in the same way. In a way, it's Gekhe Tsongkhapa is telling us, well, I describe these grounds, in all these details with this feature and that feature, but let's not forget it's beyond words and beyond ordinary thought. The sutra verse therefore underscores the ineffable and inexpressible nature of the bodhisattva grounds as realized in non-conceptual gnosis, not to deny their reality, but to emphasize that their true mode of being can only be known through the actual experience, never fully captured by thought or language. Right? So we can talk about this, yes, and get some understanding. And why would we do so? Why would we speak about it? Well, to get some sense of what we're heading towards, if that's what we choose to do. And however far away that may be from our mind, but it seems so scary and the unknown, right? But when you learn about this, you get a better sense. Oh, okay, it's not impossible. Not that I can do it right now, obviously, but I understand it better. I know where I'm going. I know where I'm heading. And so, okay, I may not be there yet, but I can go there. It gives us the confidence and the boldness to actually just go ahead and try and practice as much as we can. All right. So that was kind of more a general explanation, and Lama Tsongkhapa really spends a lot of time on that. But of course, it's good to get a good understanding, like a foundational understanding, a fundamental understanding of the grounds before moving. Oh my gosh, I'm running out. 100. No, I have more. I have more material. 103. Oh no, you only have until 103. Yeah, I've got more than that there. I'll give you again the new material probably on Monday or Tuesday. Yeah, before next week. Before next class. Okay, but might as well. Wow, we covered a lot today. But what to do? Yeah. All right, so then there's the first ground. Maybe we leave it at that today because we did cover a lot, but there wasn't anything difficult, right? No, it was easily. And we start with the first verse next time of this year. What to do? There was so much in between, pages and pages and pages without the verses. But then from now on, it's pretty much one verse after the next. So, yeah. All right. So let's start the questions. All right, got a few questions. Quite a few really good questions. But first, let's hear if you have. Yes, please. Jika?
When the Kagyu school talks about alaya, that is going from life to life, would that be seen as something like inherent, or?
No, I don't think that in the Kagyu school. I don't know, alaya, what exactly is meant by that, but I believe they mean the mental consciousness that has all the imprints and so forth, but that doesn't exist inherently. Doesn't exist intrinsically. Nothing exists intrinsically.
Yeah, like just someone recently told me that alaya is kind of seen like the essence that goes from life to life.
But a conventional essence.
That's why the Gelugpas deny alaya. So I was wondering if this has to do with something like a soul or inherent existence or not.
I don't think so. I mean, in the Gelugpa tradition, alaya is only used in the context of the mind-only school. And in the context of the, so they say alaya, I think that the term is just used differently in the two traditions. Okay. I remember Jetsuma, when she talked about alayas, at some point we had like some get together and she talked about alaya, and I'm like the mind-only alaya? So we're like, but then it turned out that she was talking about the mind basically. But she didn't go into that much detail, but I was under the impression she just talked about mental consciousness, that which holds the imprints and so forth, just using that term in the Prasangika context, while in the Gelug tradition that term is used in the Chittamatra context. So it's just used differently, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just heard that it's refuted by the Prasangika, but I didn't really understand why.
Yeah, but I think the Gelug version of the Alaya Vishnaya, or the Alaya, that is, but not the Kagyu version. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. It's very interesting. They do use vocabulary differently, and you can also see because it becomes kind of obvious because the different tradition originated from different masters in India. Naropa in the case of the Kagyu tradition, Virupa in the case of the Sakya tradition. I forget now in the Nyingma tradition. So. Of course, obviously, India, or what is known as India now, at the time of the Buddha and before Buddhism went to Tibet, the Buddha taught different people according to their different needs and predispositions, and sometimes used words differently, used them slightly differently, and then that explanation was developed on like as a lineage, and then you talked to others and there was a different lineage. And so it's not surprising. The Buddha knew exactly, if I use these words, that's most understandable for this person. But since we're all different, and People were different at the time in India, so different lineages developed. And in the Kagyu tradition, in the Sakya, in Nyingma, having different sources in India, words were used differently. So sometimes it's good to ask, how do you define, right? First I was also like, when we studied the different traditions, like for instance the Kagyu tradition, we were at Cherubling and we were debating with the monks. I told you that story before. So the Kempo or the Kenshin who taught us would teach us just in the same style of like what I knew from the IBD, for instance, would teach us. And I'd be, I don't know, say something and I'd be like, oh, I'm going to debate that. That does not make sense. That I can prove. And I was full of, oh, I'm really going to debate this now. I can show this. And then I realized we both agreed. We just used the words differently. So, they said something and then I debated and they said something else and I debated. And in the end, it was like, oh, we're both agreeing. We're just using the words differently. So that was really beautiful that in the end, it didn't feel that different. The emphasis was sometimes different, but the explanation was basically the same. And of course, as I said before, we discussed not the tantric system. The tantric system is different, but that's not a philosophy. Those are just techniques, and different techniques for different minds. Okay, great. Yes, Tomia, go ahead.
It's a bit related. What is my carrier of imprints between lives? Like it's described by Lama Tsongkhapa, Chachimakirti as well, the mere I. Because there is a debate between Pasankas and the Chittamatra, and they're saying that there cannot be an Ayavijnana, and they're asking, but when we are direct meditative equipoise, the mind is uncontaminated. So what carries the imprints? And they say, Mirai, it's
right.
But
yes.
What does it actually mean?
What does the mere I mean? What carries the imprints? Yes. Something that is really interesting in the lower schools, they sometimes provide us with, not crutches, crutches sounds too negative, but kind of like what do you call them? I knew that word. When you ride a bicycle and you have these wheels, training wheels. So using training wheels, or when you're swimming and you've got these little kind of, not called wings, but what do you call them? Like floaters? No. Anyway, you have these things on your arms so you won't, you'll be able to swim and not drown. So basically, a lot of the philosophies of the Vaibhashika, Satantrika, and so forth, they provide us with these training wheels. Because it's very hard for us to grasp. When we talk about imprints, there's so much emphasis on the imprints. So at least you need some stable vessel. And they offer that to us. Like a mind that is unchanging, that doesn't do much else but carry all these imprints. So it feels like those are taken care of. Everything is so difficult to understand anyway when it comes to the self and phenomena other than the self, and then they're in the nature of suffering and they're constantly changing. We're overwhelmed with ideas that are actually we usually accept the opposite of, right? So impermanence and what we believe to be in the nature of suffering, come on, it's my greatest happiness, and all that stuff. So then to deal with the imprints, it's difficult. So they provide us with this very stable consciousness. There are other examples, plenty of examples, like a self-knower. Okay, they talk about, every time you know something, there's another mind that knows that you know, because we remember not only the apple, but we remember seeing the apple. So again, I can account for that memory. However, as you go along through these different schools, at some point you become so used to some of these difficult ideas that previously were so difficult. It's like doing yoga. I don't know, raising your arm up to here may feel like, impossible. But you do that for a few months and then you can do crazy things with your arm. So it doesn't seem such a big deal any longer. Similarly, when we stretch the muscle, the tendons of our brain, of our mind, initially it's like, but then you get used to it, it becomes more and more flexible, and you get used to it. So then you can remove the training wheels. So one training wheel is the self-knower. It's removed, right? You don't have a self-knower. If I see an apple, I know I see an apple. Like, it's just by implication I know that. And then with the Ala Vijnaya, well, whichever mental consciousness is active right now, it holds the imprints, right? So when I'm asleep, it's the subtler mind. When I'm awake, it's the coarser mind. So whichever mental consciousness is active, it holds the imprints. Now that is all okay. This is all fine, okay. But there's one difficulty. And that is when you're in the meditative equipoise. When you're directly realizing emptiness. You have an uncontaminated mind. A mind that holds no contamination, no contaminated imprints. But you have no other mind that could hold them. So where are the imprints? In that moment, when you're in the direct realization of emptiness, on the mere I, on the merely labeled I. And we go like, yeah, but if it's on the merely labeled I, it has to be on one of the aggregates. We have that very strong sense. And that's a little difficult to grasp. But there are examples, and just off my head, I can't remember right now. I remember there was an example that one day I thought of. There is an example where, I don't know, you take a table or whatever, and it's possible sometimes to say something about a table that is not true for any of the aggregates. It's true for everything together. But I just don't remember. I remember it was a really good example where whether it was a table or whatever else it was, I came up with an example of something that applied to this particular object, but not to any of its parts. And when I came to the conclusion that was possible, then I thought, yeah, you could have in one moment, you could have a person who's absorbed in the meditative equipoise, directly realizing emptiness, and their negative imprints, especially the imprints of negativities, for instance, of afflictions, of anger and so forth, they're left on the mere I, on the merely labeled person. But don't think of the imprints as something heavy you're carrying or something. I mean, again, the imprints, they're just a potency. If they existed inherently and there were these little things, like, I don't know, like real indentations, then it would be impossible for the mere I to carry them. But those are just potencies that are now left with the merely labeled I. So mere person is another way of saying the person labeled on the basis of mind or body. So they're left on that, but they're not left on the mind and they're not left on the body.
So, just to see if I understand.
So for instance, with the table, sorry to interrupt you, but with the table, you could say, what is it that only applies to the table? That it is a table. The fact that it's a table does not apply to any of its parts. So for lack of, well, just because I don't remember, for lack of a better example, and I don't remember the example I just mentioned, but just saying, is there something that I can say about the table that doesn't apply to its parts? Yes, that it's a table. None of its parts are a table. Right? So here in this way, you could say there's something I can say about the mere I. It carries all the imprints in that moment when nothing else carries them. I know it's. I can say it, but I'm not. I'm not convinced. Means in the beginning it was like, no way, I could not. But now I got used to it more and more. I think it was also Geshe Kelsang who once said, well, there are things you can say about something that doesn't apply to any of its parts. Why should that not be the case? So he confirmed that. And so since that time, I was able to kind of work with it better. Yeah, can work with it. But I'm still undecided. Still it sounds odd saying it. Did I answer your question? It's not about when you die that the imprints are left on the mere I. You mentioned death. No, it's when you're in the meditative equipoise. That's the difficulty. Because when you're dying, just an ordinary mind that holds the imprints, Unless, of course, you utilize the very subtle clear light mind of death to meditate on emptiness, then they shift again to the mere I.
But then still, what is the thing that brings, like, what is the thing that is reborn or reincarnated in the next life when we're just normal humans and not in the equipoise state?
Oh, the mental consciousness. The continuum of the mental consciousness. But that's not the I. That's not the I.
What is it?
It's just mind. Just awareness, experience, and an experiencer.
But how does it differ from something that someone else would call a soul?
Okay, I'll tell you why. Okay, when we say...
One more thing
Pardon?
about, so like just if I understood you correctly,
Yes, go ahead.
let's say there is a bodhisattva on the path of seeing,
Yes.
like absorbed into emptiness.
A bodhisattva on the path of seeing absorbed into emptiness, yes.
So at this moment, like the mind of this bodhisattva is free of afflictive and cognitive obscuration, so it's uncontaminated, and the person, merely labeled bodhisattva, Jack, Jack has afflictive and cognitive obscurations on the person, but the mind is free.
Yes,
And
yes.
then, like,
When they arise
when
from
they
it?
arise, then both the person and the mind have afflictive and cognitive obscurations.
Yes, yes. All right, so I'll just repeat what Tommy just said. So in order for him to understand, he says, ordinarily, just ordinary beings like us, where are the obscurations, the mental obscurations? They're on our mental consciousness and they're on the mere I, on both. Because the mere I is labeled on the basis of the mental consciousness. But when you enter into the meditative equipoise directly realizing emptiness, they're no longer on the mental consciousness and they're nowhere else to be found other than on the mere I. Once you arise from that again, then it goes back to being on both the mere I as well as the mental consciousness. Absolutely, yeah, correct. But then Rika asked, okay, is this clear now? You're done with that question?
It just feels like it's a debate corner.
Yeah, I know. It's difficult to debate it, yeah. It's good to debate it. That's something to debate, to discuss, as in like, it's difficult to answer, it's easier to debate. How could it be on that mere I? Where is that? The mere I exists, but it's on none of its basis of imputation. It's not to be found anywhere. How can it be on the mere I? Can you put something on the table without it being on a part of the table? Right? I put something on the table. Is it on anything that is not the table? Yes, it's on this area. Therefore, I say it's on the table. Here we use on the table, on the mind, is left on the mind or on the table. So in the case of a cup on a table, in order for the cup to be on the table, it must be on a part of the table that is not the table. Then the argument would be, if the imprints are left on the mere I, they have to be on a part of the mere I that is not the mere I. But in this case, that doesn't work. And you can debate it and debate it and debate it, yes, and the other person just insists on saying, yes, it's possible, yes, it's possible. Yeah.
But it feels absurd.
Pardon?
It feels absurd.
It feels absurd. To me, it felt absurd in the beginning, now it feels less absurd. In the beginning, I was like, what are you talking about? You know, I talked about tables, I talked about this, leaving it there, leaving it in a suitcase, leaving it, you know. Yeah, it feels absurd, I know. But I got you, it gets better. And then Rika asks, okay, so when we die, something continues on. And what is it? The mental consciousness, a very subtle mind. Why is that not the soul? Okay, I mean, it depends on how you define soul, right? But I'm not so much concerned about the soul because I'm not attached to a soul. I mean, if I, you know, were a Christian now, if I were a Christian practitioner and I was so familiar with soul, and then I maybe be attached to a soul. But right now I'm attached to the I. I'm attached to me. So if you define the soul as something permanent, it exists separate from mind and body, it's obvious the mind cannot be called soul because it's not permanent, it's not separate. But let's think of the I. Why is the subtle mind not the I? Well, Because right now, the subtle mind is not there. In my continuum, it's not active. But my I is very active. So am I saying, if the subtle mind were the I wouldn't exist right now. If the subtle mind were the I, if the subtle mind itself were the I, we label the I on the subtle mind, but we're not saying that the subtle mind is the I. So if the subtle mind were the I, then only when the subtle mind is active, the I would be active. So right now I wouldn't be here. And that doesn't make sense. I'm active right now. And so have different mental consciousnesses. Sometimes they're coarser and sometimes they're subtler. When I'm awake, even when I'm awake, within my awakened mental consciousness, some are coarser, some are subtler. But I don't have a sense that there's a coarser I or a subtler I. I is kind of the same. And if we're looking for that kind of I, because that's the I we believe to exist. We believe that I to exist. But none of our minds could be it, because if the coarseness of the self always feels the same, while the mind is sometimes coarser and subtler, they just don't match. Right? So and I'm not saying I cannot label the I on the basis of mind and body, but that's not the I experience. I experience an I that exists separate somehow, not independent of mind and body, but still is not identical, and that is the center of the universe. Sorry. For all you guys, you're just not in the center. According to my mind, it's just me. Yeah, so that's the answer to that. It cannot be the soul unless you define the soul in the same way as you would define the mind. And then of course you can say it's the soul, but then you're just using the same, the referent of the word soul and subtle consciousness is the same.
When we talk about mind and mental factors, they often talk about the main mind that is exclusive with the mental factors. Is the main mind kind of the thing that is like...
Mind and mental factors, the way it's described can be so misleading. All right, let me give you an example. Let's take Rika. Okay, Rika the person. Rika the person has one main function. What's her main function? To be Rika. To be a human being, right? That's her main function. Let's just decide what is the main function of Rika: to be a human being. But then there are different functions. There's Rika, the expert knitter. There's Rika, the tutor. There's Rika, the student. There's Rika, the sister, and so forth, right? So you have many different functions. What is your main function? Being Rika, a human being. Let's say that was the main function. And then with regard to all your other functions, we talk about Rika the student, Rika the tutor, and so forth. So does Rika, is that like are these four different people? No. It's just talking about the same thing from a slightly different aspect. Now let's take the main mind.
Are these the isolates then?
Yeah, different isolates. They're of one nature.
I understand this in debate terms.
Yeah. So they're of one, like for instance, Rika, the human being, has a different isolate. Is like isolate is just a different way of saying she's not identical with Rika the student or Rika the tutor, for instance. So they all have their own identity, but they don't exist separate from another. So they're not. She's not identical to. But we're still talking about the same person. Yeah. We're still talking about the same person. But when I talk about Rika, the student, she appears different to my mind than Rika, the human being. So on a conceptual level, I differentiate between what's called isolate. I mean, my conceptual mind verbally, not just in terms of the verbally and from the point of view of the meaning. What is the meaning of Rika, the tutor? Well, it's Rika, a person who tutors other people. So that appears different to my conceptual mind versus Jika, the Dharma student. Again, it appears different to my mind. So to my conceptual mind, it isolates different functions that she performs. But in actuality, they refer to the same person. Okay? Now let's take it to a mind, or consciousness. What is the most basic function of consciousness? To be aware. That's called main mind. A main mind is called main mind because it describes the mind from the perspective of its main function, being aware of its object. That's what every mind does. That's the most basic function of a mind. But then it also discerns its object. It makes contact with an object. It has a volitional aspect of wanting to perceive something, right? Or moving the mind towards an object. So these other functions, which are seen as secondary, they are described as basically the same kind of mind, but from the point of view of these different functions. So from the point of view of the function of discerning its object, we talk about the mental factor of discernment. But that's just like saying Jika the student, Jika the tutor, versus Jika the human being. So they're not separate. And it's really tempting to believe they're separate. They're explained separately because otherwise if we explain them all together, we would get confused. Especially in the analogies that are sometimes given. So they say it's like the main mind is like the palm of your hand, and these mental factors are like the fingers, and they're obviously different. Then they don't refer to the same thing. Or like the main mind is like the broth, and the mental factors like the vegetables in the soup. It's like, or the main mind is like the candle, and the mental factors is like the rays of the candle. But these analogies seem to suggest they're different. No, they're just analogies. They don't have to be the same in all ways to what they serve as an analogy of. Here we're talking about the same thing, but differentiating the different functions. Speaking about the mind from the point of view of its main function and from the point of view of its secondary functions. Functions that are always there, functions that are not omnipresent, and so on. Yeah.
But when we die, we lose these functions.
Pardon?
When we die, we lose all these functions.
No, you don't lose your mind. The functions you have, you always have. You're always aware. Even when you die, you're going to be aware.
But can I still discern things after
Pardon?
I die? For example, the mental factor of discernment. Like some of the list, I wonder if, like...
They may not be as active. They may not be as strongly active. But people who had near-death experience, they report a certain feeling. They report seeing things, discerning things, paying attention to one thing versus another. I mean, except we don't know what comes after the time when you cannot come back. That, no one has come back to report about that. When we say near-death experience, they go that far and they can't come back to then recollect anything that came after. But I assume, and I think from a Buddhist, definitely from a Buddhist point of view, you continue to be aware. Even when we're asleep, we're aware. But the coarse mind doesn't know what the subtle mind does. And the subtle mind usually doesn't know what the coarse mind does. So right now the coarse mind is active, so we don't remember what the subtle mind did, unless we had a really vivid dream and we remember it. But given the fact that I dream every night, I have no idea the last time I dreamt. I'm definitely not a lucid dreamer. I really don't remember. I mean, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I may remember then. But if I don't go over the dream again, I've forgotten by morning time. So they exist in a different sphere in that, they don't necessarily connect. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, great. So, quite a few questions. Water wings. All right. I don't know where to start. There are quite a few. I'll start from the beginning. So the ones that were put in the group first. Let me just find them. Oh, yeah. What's the first one? The first one was by, surprise, surprise, Bernd. Okay. Well, maybe I skipped that question. I mean, because he's already asked a few, and I will answer all of them, but I thought Taruna, because Taruna hasn't asked many, and I'm going to skip to Taruna. So Taruna asked 2 questions. One related to Christine's question from last time. Oh no, it was also in their group, but she deleted it. She said, oh no, she didn't delete that one. No, she said, I mentioned Taylor Swift last time, remember? I said, oh my God, nowadays people are no longer revering, I don't know, maybe a holy person as in the past, like maybe a saint or whatever, but they revere actors and singers. But then Taruna says, well, maybe these are bodhisattvas. Maybe these famous people, because they want to make karmic connections, right? We talked about this. I know it sounds a little far-fetched, and I've got an answer to that. But the thing is, or I believe I have an answer to this. You see, like we talked about this, bodhisattvas want to make a lot of connection with other sentient beings to be of greatest benefit to them, especially once they become enlightened. And they can manifest in any way. They don't always have to manifest as hotshot lamas. We maybe think, oh, they must have like incredible, effect on the world, so they have to come back as these great lamas. But I'm pretty sure, since they have lots of manifestations at their disposal, that they see some way in which they can benefit a smaller group of people, and why not manifest in that way? I mean, why not? And the sutras are very clear. For instance, I think it's the Lotus Sutra, I'm not sure, but I seem to remember it was in the Lotus Sutra, like Avalokiteshvara. It says Avalokiteshvara can appear as a monk, a king, a merchant, a woman, a child, a Brahmin, can appear in whichever form possible, in different forms. So, therefore, a bodhisattva who's reached the first ground can basically choose their rebirth. Okay, can choose the manifestations, and we've heard already on the first level there's at least 100. And if they have a far reach, they could become a singer, an actor, a politician, a business leader, or even a social media influencer. But wait, that's not all. That's not all. I'm just saying, allowing them to connect with millions of people, right? Make that connection in order to plant the seeds of compassion, wisdom, and virtue. That's important as well. So the key point is the motivation. What is the motivation? Whether a particular action is an action of a bodhisattva or not, it depends on the motivation. But if the motivation is fame, ego, or attachment, I think we can pretty sure say. So I don't know Taylor Swift. I don't know any other singer. So I believe that if someone was a bodhisattva, then their actions should reflect that bodhisattva ideal. Not in the sense of like teaching the Dharma, but a life that is marked by compassion, humility, ethical conduct, and the intention to benefit others. Even without Dharma and so forth. And of course, bodhisattvas want to appear maybe as a famous singer to reach a large audience, uplift the minds through their lyrics, which should not lead to the enhancement of attachment and aggression and so forth, as maybe some lyrics do, inspire kindness and reduce suffering, and connect with people that would otherwise never be interested in the Dharma or want to go to a Dharma talk. So it's possible. But I don't know, these actors and Taylor Swift and so forth, does her life really reflect that of the bodhisattva ideal? I can't say. But if it does, who knows? Yeah, so we've heard before, we should be careful. We never know who's a bodhisattva. We spoke about the danger of injuring a bodhisattva, because you indirectly harm other sentient beings through that. And we never know. Bodhisattvas don't have to be hot shots. Don't have to be like, high lamas sitting on thrones and so forth. They could be just ordinary people. Yeah. And there's also in terms of the questions, there are actually 4 means of attracting disciples. Have you heard of these 4 means of attracting disciples? So you're generous, you give things to people, you speak pleasing words, and in whichever form they manifest, and then you give appropriate teachings and you act in accordance with what you teach. So a teaching doesn't have to be a Buddhist teaching. I mean, it's all about kindness and love and compassion and so forth. Some people are not ready to hear about emptiness and suffering and karma. So then Bodhisattvas teach what they're ready to hear. Yeah. So I thought that was an important question. Then Jimmy says something. He says, I just shorten it, his question, or he makes a statement, but I totally agree with him. So in the example of a tree and a forest, you know, the philosophical example, you have a forest and a tree falls over. Does it make a sound or not? If the sound existed intrinsically and so forth, it would have to make a sound in that moment, right? If there were an inherently existent sound and so forth. Or if no, let's put it the other way. No. Of course, it should be in that moment. Yeah, I misspoke. What I meant to say was, if there is a mind that labels the sound, or an ear consciousness to hear the sound, if that was necessary, then it would exist intrinsically. So the labeling would exist intrinsically, the perception would exist intrinsically. As we've heard, all phenomena are merely labeled, but that doesn't mean that in each moment everything has to be labeled. Remember the analogy I gave? We say this cup weighs 200 grams, I don't know, but let's say 200 grams. That is true in each moment. You don't have to weigh it every time. We're just saying the measurement is 200 grams, or in the case of something exists when it's been merely labeled. So then he says, in this example, the tree, the forest, and the sound, so even they are all merely labeled. Even the listener are merely labeled, that the mind applies. We don't need an actual listener in the forest, because we're thinking about the event right now. We're labeling it right now. Right? It's true, because we're thinking about it right now. So now we're labeling, like, let's say we're talking about a particular forest and a particular tree that we saw has fallen over when we came past it this morning. So now we're thinking about it, we're labeling it. And it doesn't have to happen in that moment. The moment we imagine or talk about the sound, it exists as a conceptual designation in the mind. The entire situation, the falling tree, the sound, the absence of a listener, is something constructed by thoughts. Things don't exist from their own side. They exist because the mind labels and narrates them. Right? But of course, there's a basis of labeling. That is true. What is the basis? The fallen over tree that we can observe now. And based on our experience, we can say the tree fell over and it made a sound. It crashed into the other tree. Yeah, so I agree with him. And then Bernd said something about labeling. I think, I hope I understood him correctly. I just summarized it a little bit because it was becoming, or explained it, I just sent a message to myself to have the phone, and I can go back to his message. But he said something about the characteristics of like being blue, round, impermanent, and so forth. These are the basis of designation upon which labeling depends. Remember, he used the term labelable or imputable. So that's really, he's saying the mere fact that something can be labeled at all. If phenomena existed inherently, they couldn't be labeled. And I agree with that. So this is what he called labelable or imputable, that of course the mind can impute things, but it's also that the objects or the basis of labeling, that can happen because nothing exists in and of itself. So you can label it. So it's like a universal potential shared by all phenomena. The absence of intrinsic existence is what makes it possible. Yeah, so in other words, things are empty, they can function as as basis of a designation, and therefore on the basis of them we can label them. But they themselves are also labeled on their basis of imputation, and so forth. So I would agree with him. I think I hope I understood him correctly. Yeah, that basically emptiness allows for things to be labeled. We usually say things are merely labeled because they lack inherent existence, but it's also because they lack inherent existence we can label them. Otherwise we couldn't. Yeah, anyway. So I think this idea makes sense. I hope I captured his message correctly because it was really long, but yeah, I totally agree with him. Then he says there are passages in some texts, he thinks in Shantideva, that say not only should a particular negativity be eliminated, but even its name should disappear. Yes, there are some passages when it says, may this negativity never occur again, and may not even the term for that negativity be known of. Right? It sounds like a beautiful, so in such a way that people don't even know of this negativity, like in the form of a prayer, aspiration and prayer. So it's like saying, of course, in the way you have to be able to say the very act. So if you have completed this negativity, you have to be able to talk about the negativity to be able to talk about its removal. But I think this kind of aspirational prayer here is more saying, may people not even know about this concept, not even know, like let's say killing. May there be no longer any killing, and may the term killing no longer be used, so that people have no concept of it. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Of course, if you want to explain the absence of killing, you have to have a, but you know, that's not, I think, I don't even really understand what he meant with this, but yeah, so in the end, you can have no killing, but still have the concept of killing. That's of course possible. But here it's kind of an aspirational prayer that made people not even know about this possibility, which is of course even greater. No one even thinks about. I mean, you can not kill someone, but think about doing so, but may not even the thought arise. I think that's what he's saying. All right. Taruna also asked another question about, she asked a question about, where did I put it? I can't find it now in my notes, but anyway, go back to her question in here. She said, well, she's found the Dharma in this lifetime. Where is it? Where is all this? Taruna. For some reason I can't find her question now. The house and the thief. Oh yeah, Christina, she did say that about maybe the singers want to make a connection. Yeah, sure, she did mention that. Oh yeah, here it is. How do I make sure that this precious Dharma, which I've met within this life, by the ripening of some good karma, to remember it in my future lives? And will I carry it on further from here, or do we start all over again? All right, so first of all, how do we make sure that in the next life we meet the Dharma again, if we wish for that to happen? And how do I know I don't have to start from the beginning again? Well, good news is, it depends on what we do in this lifetime. So, of course, we carry certain imprints with us from one life to the next. And if we leave enough imprints, we will definitely meet the Dharma again and continue from where we stopped in this lifetime. But so usually what it says in the text, for instance, if you want to encounter the Dharma again, we should study, reflect, and meditate on the Dharma. So studying just the intellectual knowledge we won't take with us. But understanding the Dharma is, of course, the first step based on which we can then practice, internalize the Dharma. And anything we internalize, we bring into our daily life. Anything we learn, if we manage to bring it into our daily life, to bring it onto an emotional level, I spoke about this before, our actions are all governed by emotions. Negative, positive ones, it just depends. Now, when we study the Dharma, we reflect on its meaning and we try to internalize it. We bring that which we learned or which we reflected onto an emotional level so that it affects our actions. And that leaves imprints in such a way that these are carried over to the next life. They're left on the mental consciousness, which continues to the next life. So that's the first thing. First thing is to learn about the Dharma, reflect on it, and most importantly, internalize it. Apply this to our daily life. The second thing is to engage in purification practices. That's also important. If we want, we can, if we have the time, to do Vajrasattva retreats or other kind of practices, very focused kind of purification practices, or just on a daily basis we can do 21 recitations of Vajrasattva, for instance. So to remove any obstacles to meeting the Dharma again. So purifying negativities. At the same time, we have to accumulate a lot of virtue. So bodhicitta, great compassion, practice, be bold. Like, I know I don't have great compassion. I know I don't have bodhicitta. I'm under no illusion that I don't have it. But just do it. You know, when I do my practice, I just pretend. Fake it until you make it. Because these, I mean, of course, it doesn't just pop up like that. And I can't pretend a certain state of mind is compassion when it's not. But to try and develop compassion through the different methods, we went through them. Our connection with all sentient beings from the past, understanding what we have in common with all sentient beings, and so forth. So in other words, equalizing and exchanging self with others, as well as the 6 causes and 1 effect. And in that way, we can generate great compassion, at least what's called like a similitude of that, and then try to foster it. I mean, try to train in that again and again and again. We can do this. With great compassion and bodhicitta, it's not so much about understanding, it's much more about becoming accustomed to these minds. And we accumulate so much virtue doing that. Again, the likelihood to meet the Dharma again in the next life comes through this, the purification and accumulating virtue. And lastly, aspirations. Utilize the power of the mind. So, based on the fact that what we experience is a reflection of our own mind. So it shows us what we experience on a daily basis, what happens to us, that happens to us and not to everyone else. So it's a reflection of our thoughts of the past. But it's also the things we wish for. And that is what the mind, the power of the, what I meant with the power of the mind. I believe if it's a virtuous thought, supported by the appropriate causes and conditions, then whatever you wish for, you can accomplish. It takes time. It takes time. But we have also worldly example of people who really want to accomplish something. And when in their childhood, it seems like nothing seems to support that possibility. But somehow, over time, they work hard, they accumulate the causes and conditions, but there's this aspiration. And that aspiration, I mean, bodhicitta is an aspiration, great compassion is an aspiration. All these emotional states are aspirations. So to make prayers as in like, may I. So not even directed at a deity or something, but may I in the future encounter the Dharma again. May I find a qualified teacher. May I be able to continue practicing. May I find all the... Bodhisattvas do this all the time. They don't daydream. When they're not reflecting on, I don't know, emptiness and so forth. We'll hear one of them, once we move towards the first ground now, I mean, we are starting with the first ground. What is the first thing we learn? They make samantabhadra prayers. Samantabhadra is the bodhisattva of aspirations. Aspiration. Right? Direct the power of our mind where we want to go. It's all in our own hand where we want to go. But we're usually too busy with other stuff to have time to aspire towards something. Bodhisattvas don't waste any time. Yeah, so these are the 4 possibilities. Study, practice, study, reflect, and meditate. Accumulate virtue, purify negativity, and make aspirational prayers. And I think we're pretty safe then. Ooh, sorry. Okay, so the other questions, I'll address them next time. So again, let's dedicate. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Denzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the precious view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right, thank you.